If you've ever wondered whether your Social Security check is wrong or not, you're not alone. And the fact is, the SSA does make mistakes. We hear about it all of the time. This video is going to go through 10 of the most common ways the SSA can make a mistake. And the good news is, with this information, you have actionable information and you can do something with it. All right, let's get into it. The first is that they have the wrong work history for you. Let me explain. Have you ever seen one of these? It's the Motorola Dynatac 8000. It's from 1983 and it costs about $4,000 in those dollars, so about $10,000 today to purchase. It was the best technology of the time. It had 30 minutes of talk time, 8 hours of wait time. But whenever you saw someone on one of these phones, it's almost like they were doing that phone commercial, walking around the room saying, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" Well, imagine what technology would have been like when they were inputting your information into their new computer systems. And basically, the SSA had used computers, and they still do, of course, since about 1953, 1955. But they had a major push to modernize the SSA computers in the late 90s. So what was happening in the 80s and mid-90s may or may not have been correct. It was all still manually keyed in. So why do I tell you this? Why do I show you an old phone from back in the day? Well, there are three ways that a mistake can be made here from back then. And they all involve human error interacting with automation. A computer by itself doesn't make a mistake, usually anyway, unless the software is written wrong. But where the mistake is almost always made is the human interaction with that computer. It happens today, but it would have happened a lot more back then. So if you were born in March and they weren't wearing their glasses, the person at the SSA wasn't wearing their glasses, and they keyed in August because it kind of looks like a 3, well, all of a sudden your information is off by several months. The next is a keying error at your old employer. The same problem that existed at the SSA also existed in business, but if you imagine a small business trying to have the technology of the day, it would have been worse than the SSA's technology. And finally, there was a lot of room for mischief. If you were an employer and you were trying to avoid paying taxes, FICA, matches, etc., well, there are a lot of things you could do back then and you might not have gotten caught. I personally know of a situation where an employer was engaging in a lot of mischief. It wasn't me, but it was someone very close to me. He was stealing money from the company pension. He would send the employees a tax document at the end of the year, and it was a tax document as an independent contractor, even though they were W-2 employees. And I think he ended up going to prison. I'm not quite sure, because by the time everything fell apart, the person I knew was long gone from the organization. The point is, there was a lot more room for that type of activity back in the day. It's pretty hard today unless you're engaging in really deep, dark type of business activities, things that are so under the radar, illegal activities primarily, that you just couldn't get caught, or it'd be very hard to get caught anyway. So regardless of if you actually think that there was an error in your earnings or not, it really makes sense to check your earnings history. You can do that by going to ssa.gov/my account, and you will have your information right there, and you can scan your earnings history from the time you started working all the way up through today. If something looks wrong, then question it, of course. The second is just the wrong start date. If you think back to the example I just gave, where a Social Security employee keys in an 8 instead of a 3, or a 3 instead of an 8, well, that changes the size of your Social Security payment by about 0.5% per month that they miss. If they have you starting in March and it was really August, for example, well, that's 2.5% approximately on your Social Security payment. Now, that doesn't impact you a lot, I suppose, in 1 year. But imagine having that number wrong for the next 30 years of your life. Well, then it becomes a very big number. And your cost of living adjustment is based on the size of your Social Security payment. So that's off too. And usually it's just a month or two. Instead of starting in March, they have you starting in February, for example. But still, whatever the number is, it's important to get it right. Next is the calculation error in your primary insurance amount. Now let me explain what that means. Your primary insurance amount is a collection of calculations, at least 37 of them, by the way. And if any one of those calculations is wrong, your primary insurance amount is wrong. Your primary insurance amount is the size of your Social Security payment at full retirement age, and a lot of other things are based off of what that actual number is, including the haircut that you're going to get on your Social Security payment if you retire early, or the premium you're going to get on your Social Security payment if you retire later. The spousal benefit is based on the size of the primary insurance amount. The survivor benefit, the same thing. And there are other benefits that are based on the size of the primary insurance amount as well. So it's very important that this number is completely correct. And by the way, if you're new here, hello, my name is Jeff. I'm a CPA turned author turned public speaker. I'm also a registered Social Security analyst, and I have 25 years of financial services industry experience. I started this channel in 2020 because my father actually got sick during that period of time. He got COVID, and I went in to help him with his finances, and one of my kids said, "Why don't you do that for other people as well?" And with that, the channel was born. So we'd love to have you as part of our family. Just click subscribe and turn on notifications so that you get alerted the next time we post a video. We post several times a week now. Next up, garnishment errors. Now, your Social Security payment is not immune from garnishment. A lot of people used to think back in the day that that was yours and yours alone and nobody could take it. That's actually not true. There are at least 5 instances, and actually more than 5, but 5 pretty common instances where your Social Security payment can get garnished. The first is if you work while collecting Social Security and you exceed the maximum limits. The fact is, a lot of people do work while they collect Social Security, and those limits sneak up on them. They don't intend to breach those limits, but they do breach those limits. And when that happens, it's not all of a sudden garnishment of your Social Security payment. It takes time. And so in this situation, often people are caught off guard because they get a note from the SSA a year or 2 later looking for some sort of repayment. And if that's not available, well, then your Social Security check gets garnished. Now that amount isn't gone forever. They give it back to you when you reach full retirement age in the form of a higher payment. But again, you need to be able to recalculate what that payment should be. They don't give it to you all at one time. That would be too easy. They give you a higher Social Security payment. The next scenario is administrative errors. And if they can make an administrative error on the downside, they can also make it on the upside. And when they determine that they've made the administrative error, they've paid you too much, they're going to garnish your Social Security check and bring back the money that they overpaid you. So again, it's important to know if it's happening, you should have it stopped because they will catch it at some point. The next garnishment is child support. And again, in this situation, if your Social Security check is garnished, child support is a manual determination. It's not automatic. It's not done by a computer. There's somebody somewhere on the other end determining what that number should be. And whenever you put human beings in a process that's digital, bad things happen. Bad things potentially happen anyway. So in this situation, just marry up what's supposed to be taken out with what is actually being taken out, because oftentimes they're 2 different things. The same is true for alimony. Your Social Security check can be garnished for alimony. Just make sure that the number that you owe is the number that's coming out of your check. And then finally, the last garnishment situation that's pretty common is if someone lives in a foreign country, and this is a very specific situation primarily to non-US citizens. If you live in a foreign country and you stay out of this country for a certain period of time and you don't return, they will garnish your Social Security payment. Next up is the wrong cost of living adjustment. It happens all of the time. I don't know why it happens all the time, but you hear about it a lot, where someone receives their Social Security check and they realize that the payment was supposed to be 3% higher and it was only 2% higher. Or in some rare instances, it's higher than 3%. The point is that this is an easy one to fix. You just need to look at the payment increase, make sure that the difference isn't something else, like contribution to Medicare, for example, and take it from there. And just one point here, if you haven't signed up for our free Social Security quick guide, that quick guide is available until the end of February 2025. Just go to holyschmidt.com/quick guide. It's 1 page. It's packed with information, super easy to use. And it's my free gift to you. Next up is a miscalculation of the spousal benefit or the survivor benefit. And this happens a lot. And the reason is that these are somewhat lengthy calculations themselves, so someone can make a calculation error. The spousal benefit isn't just 50% of the primary insurance amount. There are deductions on that amount based on the age of the spouse when they take it. And the same thing holds true with the survivor benefit. It's not just 100% of what the primary insurance amount was or was supposed to be. There are situations where it's higher or lower. The calculations for both of these aren't hard, but they do involve multiple steps. And when you have human beings involved, they occasionally get it wrong. Next up, an incorrect deduction for your Medicare premium payments. Now, this one I hear about a lot. This isn't one that happens just once in a while. This is a pretty big area of focus. So just know what your payment is supposed to be and make sure that it's the right number coming out of your Social Security check. Next up, delayed life change adjustments. Now, what am I talking about? Marriage, divorce, becoming a widow, and adoption primarily. Let's talk about each of these. If you were previously single and you get married, your spouse at a point in time is entitled to a spousal benefit. But what often happens is that the spouse doesn't file in time, or the Social Security Administration gets the information, but it sits in an inbox somewhere and doesn't get dealt with in a timely fashion. And so there's a delay in making the payment to the spouse. And because there's a delay, there's money owed to the spouse for the spousal payment. Similarly, if someone's just gotten divorced, they're entitled to a spousal payment if they were married long enough and they haven't remarried. But when you add requirements that need to be met and human beings that are determining if those requirements are met, occasionally mistakes are made. And then there's the survivor benefit. Oftentimes, the size of the survivor benefit is based on the date in which the spouse passed. If this information was late in getting to the SSA, or it was just keyed in incorrectly, the size of the survivor benefit could be wrong. Next up, one that is very common is fraud or identity theft. Now, let me make a distinction here because most people think it goes the opposite direction of the way it would really go. It's unlikely, or let's just say far less likely, that someone who's using your Social Security number is going to show up and try to claim your Social Security payment. There's so many reasons for this. The biggest one is that they could go to prison, but more importantly, they didn't use your Social Security number to claim your Social Security when you reached the age to claim Social Security. They used your Social Security number to gain access to employment. Now, what happens when you have two people with two different jobs paying into the same Social Security number? Well, the Social Security account is inflated. So when you go in to claim your Social Security, the amount of FICA that's been paid in is larger than the amount that actually was paid in by you. And so a larger Social Security payment is possible. Fast forward a few years, when the SSA discovers this out, they're going to go back and say, well, this wasn't you, and we're reducing your Social Security payment. And finally, the recent elimination of the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, that was retroactive to the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. And so there's a very good chance that the amount that you should be paid by Social Security is incorrect. So this one is something you should definitely check out. And because this change was so new, it happened in December of last year, there's a very good chance that the SSA is getting flooded with people saying, you made a calculation error, my number is much higher with the elimination of this provision. So you do need to get in line and have that discussion with the SSA. I'm quite sure that there are a lot of people out there whose number is wrong because of this. So after you've done your research here and you have determined that there's something wrong, what do? Well, I'm putting a number down below that you can call and have the discussion with the SSA. Just call that number and start the dialogue, because you can't fix it until you identify it and have that discussion. You flag it with them and let them know that there's a problem. If you like this video, check out that video, 8 ways you can lose your Social Security payment instantly. This is Jeff Schmidt, and I will see you in that video right there.